What if one of the strongest known characters in Genshin was Irminsold? That's to say, all records of them have been erased. This character is none other than Istaroth, the goddess of time. Now before we begin, this is my first crack at a full-fledged lore video, so let me know how I do and feel free to discuss in the comments below or in the Discord linked as well what you think. Now going back to the theory, you notice how we don't ever see the name Istaroth directly mentioned except for in two places. The first is in Raiden's Story Quest 2, where Raiden says that a higher power was involved, and in a small subscript, MiHoYo mentions that it was Istaroth. And secondly, it was in Before Sun and Moon. They wrote the name Istaroth backwards because the people dare not speak her true secret name. When we see Istaroth mentioned elsewhere, it's something along the lines of the Thousand Winds or Kairos or Tokyo Okami, something along those lines. But with context clues, we have linked it all as the same entity belongs to those names. What if Istaroth was Irminsold and they were erased or edited out, and that's why all that's left of them are these loose names of her? But why? Well, in Before Sun and Moon, we see that it mentions Fanny's could have been the primordial one. Why would they mention Fanny's directly but not Istaroth? If she was one of the shades that had answered the calls, why wouldn't they just write Istaroth directly? Unless they know about being able to rewrite history, because they call Istaroth the ruler of the unchanging world. So what if we're dealing with Istaroth being Irminsold, similar to how Scaramouche or Greater Lord Brukadavada have been? Still, the question lingers, why? If it's from the second who came, wouldn't they have gotten rid of Fanny's name too, since that was the one who they fought, and they would make it seem as though they were the ones to defeat the sovereigns? But if we also go based off the Sun and Moon, then we know that Fanny's actually was the victor against the second who came, which means that Fanny's was the one to Irminsold Istaroth. But why? Why would the primordial one Irminsold one of his shades? If we go based on the connections that Istaroth is the goddess of flowers that has been floating around the community by Ashikai, as well as other lore crafters, then that would mean that Istaroth was a Seelie, or at least the ancestor of the Seelie, which leads to an interesting story in the records of Juyu. We have a story about the Seelies that had piqued my interest. The ancestors of the Seelie met a traveler from afar, with whom they swore an oath of union, witnessed by the three sisters of the Lunar Palace. Just 30 days later, a sudden disaster struck. The Seelie and their lover fled into exile and the world collapsed around them, fleeing until the terrible calamity caught up with and seized them. Their cruel punishment was to be separated from each other for eternity and to have their memories wiped without a trace. The graceful but heartbroken Seelie and the sisters grew more sullen and withdrawn with each passing day, to the point where their wondrous forms withered away, leaving fragments of their former selves scattered in the mountains and ruins, where they turned into tiny little life forms. They had forgotten so much, lost so much, and had been stripped of their voices and wisdom, yet they continued to sing the same song of grief. Because of this, still harboring a shred of the deep love they once had for their long-lost lover, they still act as guides to travelers who stop in the mountain mist, seeking to retrace their memories of an ancient story in long-abandoned ruins, disused makeup cabinets, and now undecipherable poetry. So what if, in this case, ancestors of the Seelies meant Istaroth? And because that's the connection that we've been drawing as of late, and of travelers from afar, well, that would happen to be us. So we were married to her, or maybe it was our twin, depending on how it turns out. This would explain why we can't remember anything about this world, even though it seems we've been here for quite a while, even before the whole Sustainer of Heavenly Principle shebang happened in the opening scenes. This will also give credence to the theory that Paimon is a moon sister, but more of that in a future video. I know, I threw a lot, so let me know what you think about the story, given all the current context clues that we have in the game so far. And one interesting thing about the connection of Istaroth being the goddess of flowers is that, where does that leave King Deshret? Since, we know that he had a thing for the goddess of flowers. We know that Deshret loved the goddess of flowers, but we don't know if she ever reciprocated that love back to him, which is weird. Why would MiHoYo, in this case, write a one-sided love story? unless the goddess of flowers knew she was in love with someone else. And she knew it wouldn't be right to love someone else on top of that. She also warns Deshret to not go seeking the master of the four shades. How would she know so much about Phanes unless she was a shade or saw what he can do? We also see that in the Paradise of Lost set, there's mention that in a bygone time, which only the Jinn recall, the Lord of Flowers was cast aside by the heavens. So something that had to have happened, in which Istaroth was viewed unfavorably to Phanes. This is to assume that Phanes here is the same one that had created Istaroth. What if the second that came actually won the battle against Phanes, and now taking the name as such? In the Amethyst Crown, we see the story unfold from the eyes of the goddess of flowers. In it, it is said that it was a faraway time of calm and peace. Divine envoys spoke openly with the people then, bringing them the word from the heavens. But in time, invaders descended from beyond the firmament, bringing with them destruction, overturning rivers, spreading plagues. And though the invaders brought war to my former kin, they also brought about illusion that could break through the shackles to the land. This leads me to believe that the second actually did win, and now are the imposters up in Celestia. This would explain the change from the benevolent god seen in Before Sun and Moon, which mentions that if there was hunger, the heavens would bring down food and rain. If there was poverty, the earth would bring forth its riches. If melancholy were to spread, the heavens would reply with their voices. To one that the goddess of flowers later described as the masters of the heavens consumed by fear. For the rising tide of the delusions and breakthroughs sent down the divine nails to mend the land, laying waste to the mortal realm. One that the original Phanes spent 400 years in developing after defeating the sovereigns to create. That just does not make sense to me. In my opinion, the Phanes that we know of today is not the original one that had created this mortal realm to begin with. One final connection for this theory that Istaroth may have been Irminsul is us going back to Mondstadt. In Mondstadt, we have all these temples dedicated to Istaroth's worship as the Thousand Winds of Time. In the Sacrificial Weapon series also mentions that Istaroth and Venti were worshipped together, but the world still mentions Barbados, but they don't mention Istaroth anymore as the god of time or something along those lines, which I find awfully peculiar. If you have two peas in a pod, you don't suddenly forget about one of them while mentioning the other. And maybe this is why Venti knew who we were and remembers us because we were once in cahoots with the goddess of time. Or maybe Venti has something to do with her being Irminsuled by Phanes. Crazy, right? But I digress. This was meant to be about Istaroth. So let me know what you think about the theory. Feel free to follow me on my other social medias, link below, and I'll see y'all in the next video.